Good morning. Hello, this is Otto Penzler. I'm at the Mysterious Bookshop for our weekly video about authors and books and collecting. I just want to say that everybody has to remember, if you're watching this, that it's a bookshop. It's not a museum. It's not a library. So people frequently say, why don't you do Agatha Christie? Why don't you do Dashiell Hammett? Why don't you do Dorothy Sayers? Because I don't have the books. I can only show you and talk about books that I've got. And I've gone through, over the course of the past year, it's almost a year since we started doing these videos, I've gone through most of the authors where I have a large number of books, a large enough number to make the talk interesting enough and have enough things to show you. I'll continue to do it as long as we have the books, but please understand that I can only show you what we have in the store. So that's why we took a little hiatus during the holidays, and why this show may not go on for the next 100 years. So having said that, today I want to talk about who at one time was the world's #1 best-selling author, Edgar Wallace. The great line about Wallace, and I've never known if it was absolutely true, but it's been repeated so often, including in many biographical essays about Edgar Wallace, that during the 20s and 30s, 1 out of every 4 books read in the British Empire was written by Edgar Wallace. Now, we have bestsellers now, Dan Brown and James Patterson and Lee Child and so on, but no one has ever sold 1/4 of all the books sold in a country for more than 15, 17 years, and that was Edgar Wallace. When I wrote or co-wrote the Encyclopedia of Mystery and Detection, which was published in 1975, I think, 76. The statistic that I used at that time was accurate at that time, that he had written 173 books. 173. Now, there are several things that have come out since, in the last 45 years, since that book was written. New short story collections, recently discovered manuscripts and that sort of thing. But the prolificity of this author, easy for me to say, of this author is just remarkable. And I'll talk about some books in a minute, but I also want to say that he, based on his books, the popularity of his books was so great that in England, there were nearly 200 movies made from his books. There was a television series that went for almost 100 episodes. They were long. There were, in addition to the theatrical releases, there was almost 100 made for television, which then were theatrically released as the B movie, and where back in the day where people would go in and they'd get 2 movies. The double bill, and his books were the B movie, the cheap, the second feature. Then, in the 60s, Edgar Wallace mania hit Germany, and all of the books were reissued in Germany, and they made more than 100 movies in German based on Edgar Wallace's books. Now, in the beginning, a lot of those movies where you could recognize the book or the story on which the film was that served as the basis for the film, but they were making them so fast and so quickly that really you couldn't even recognize what Wallace had written to be part of the movie. They were just putting out Edgar Wallace movie, Edgar Wallace movie, Edgar Wallace Mystery Theater. And the connection to the actual books was very, very slim. So Wallace had no education. He dropped out of school when he was about 11 years old, and worked doing various jobs. and then joined the Army and served in the Army for a while, and then worked as a reporter, a military reporter for Reuters. And so some of his early books are about military subjects, not necessarily crime. Of the 173 books that were true, that was the figure that I used back then, about 100 were mysteries, mystery, crime, suspense, thrillers, and then there were other subjects. There were comic novels, there were military novels, there were even some books of poetry. But it's as a thriller writer that he's best known, and that's what I'm going to show you today. Now, most of the books came out first in England, as you might expect, but there are some that came out in America first. Not that many, and I'm not going to talk about them too much, but I will show you some of the books that we have by Wallace. But I have to tell you in advance that normally part of what I do is show you how to tell a first edition. I can't do that with most of the British books. And the way that I tell is I have a bibliography. There are 2 bibliographies written of Edgar Wallace's books, and I consult those, and so then I mark them first edition or first U.S. edition or whatever I know to be. But the Brits were not very helpful about this. He used different publishers. He had many different publishers, although Hodder and Stoughton was his most frequent publisher. He wrote for many, many different publishers, and they all have different systems. And that time, they didn't seem to pay a whole lot of attention to showing a first edition or a non-first edition. I'll give you a good example here. His most famous series was The Four Just Men. The very first book that he wrote was called The Four Just Men, and he couldn't find a publisher, so he published it himself. He invented a company called the Talus Press and had a contest at the back where if you could solve the mystery, you would win £500. This is 1909. £500 in 1909 was the yearly salary for some people. Unfortunately, a lot of people solved it, and he had to pay everybody, and he went bankrupt. It wasn't the best thought out plan of all time. Now, the book title is The Four Just Men, but really there were only 3 just men in it because the 4th just man was killed. And the 3 just men were wealthy wealthy aristocrats who wanted to have justice for criminals that the law couldn't reach, and they went after and proved those people guilty of crimes, and sometimes took the law into their own hands. So the 3 Just Men became a very successful series. There are about 5 books. And the bibliography of even those is so complicated because they changed titles when it came to America. So there's the 3 Just Men, again the 3 Just Men, the Law of the 3 Just Men, but there was another book called The Law of the 4 Just Men, which is not the same book as The Law of the 3 Just Men. So it's really complicated. It needs the bibliography to sort it out. I've sorted it out, but I don't have enough time in my life to explain it all to you today. But I'm going to show you some of the 3 Just Men books. Here's Hodder and Stoughton, but here's also Hodder and Stoughton. You can see it's a totally different binding. One's illustrated, one's not. This is a higher quality cloth. This is a cheaper quality cloth. But neither of them have a date in the book and nothing to indicate that it is in fact a first edition. So here's the title page. No help. Doesn't tell you anything. And here's the copyright page filled with all kinds of empty space. So in order to know if it's a first edition, well, you have to look at the bibliography, which describes the binding, but also you could tell that this is a reprint. Look at the list of titles, of other Edgar Wallace titles, and if you find the dates for those, you'll see that some came after 1925 when the book was published, and there's the first printing with a smaller number of titles. And this is what I mean by it being really complicated. So, but this book, because of the popularity of the series, was printed in a fairly large quantity. So even though it's a very nice copy, it's only $35. Then here we have, again, The Three Just Men. And it's, again, now there are also different color bindings. Many of the books, of the Edgar Wallace books, first came out in a blue cloth binding. A series look came out in this yellow binding. If you look at the top, you'll see that there's an Edgar Wallace logo. Now, some of these are first printings, and here's a different title, but again, with the logo. Most of these are still first printings, but with a later binding. So again, I'll show you Hodder and Stoughton. Title page doesn't show anything, doesn't even have a date. And then the copyright page. Once again, lots of white space. And the same, the Brigand, again, first edition, $35. And again, the Just Men. Title page, nothing. But this copyright page is also doubles up as a dedication page, which is no help whatsoever in determining whether it's a first edition or a reprint. This is quite rare to find a jacket from it's not a great jacket because it's got big chips, but this is again, and you know it's a first because it's got a 7.6 price on the spine, which was the price that publishers would put on virtually all of the books published in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and into the 50s. And then when you see a 3.6 or a 2.6, mostly those are reprints. But this one, actually on the title page, you see there does have a date, 1930, which is known to be the true first edition. So because it's got the jacket, which is quite rare, and it's a lovely copy of the book, this is $125. And finally, I'll show you one more Hodder. Again, this is the Feathered Serpent. This was filmed and dedicated to Daphne du Maurier, which is kind of nice, but no information, no bibliographical information. This is a different publishing company, Ward Lock, very popular, very big company that published a lot of books over the years, and I've shown lots of Ward Lock. These are a little bit easier because you can tell the first edition with Ward Lock because the date is on the title page. It is not infallible because sometimes they would put a date on the title page that was later. So there could be a 1912, it would show up with 1912 on the title page. And it was an erratic system. They rarely were consistent about it. But if you know the publication date and you see the date on the title page, there's a really good chance that that's the first edition. The copyright page has no information whatsoever. And it was not uncommon to find books marked second printing, third printing. So Ward Lock was much better than Hodder about showing whether it's a first edition. And here's a book published by John Long, The Hand of Power. And I don't think John Long was any better than Hodder. title page has no date, and the copyright page has no information other than providing a date, but we don't know for sure if this has been reprinted or not. I mean, I do because I looked it up in the bibliography, and it is a first edition, and it's just an okay copy. You know, it's got a little faded on the spine, and it's got a book plate. All of those things detract from the condition, so it's only $25. He was also very popular in America, and American publishers were a lot better about showing first editions or first American editions. I did check these to make sure that these are the first American editions, and in a couple, I'll show you a couple later that are first editions. Here's Doubleday Crime Club, and I will say that of all of the publishers that have been around for a long time and published a lot of books, they were the most consistent and always showed the words first edition on the copyright page. For years, there was a book that I thought they had forgotten to do it because every copy that I found had no slug that said first edition for 15 years of looking at books, and then finally I found one that said first edition. So it must have been reprinted a million times, and the first edition was obviously quite rare. Oh, because it's got a very nice jacket, by the way, and they're cool. Doubleday Crime Club jackets in the 30s, 40s were just the coolest. So this is $75. And here's a American First of the Crimson Circle. No jacket. But there's the title page, and the copyright page will again say first edition. As I said, Doubleday is infallible. You can rely on them. That's $25. And this is an early book by Small Maynard, which is a company that we don't really see in mysteries all that often. It's an early book, and Small Maynard always showed a reprint when they reprinted. Now the copyright page doesn't say first edition, but we know that it is. And it's got a really terrific jacket in condition, in terrific condition. No chips, as you see. So this is pretty. This is $125. Here's two. These are first editions because there are no British edition with the same title. These are both by World Publishing, which usually is a reprint house. And they're printed in fairly large quantities, International Fiction Library, but nice dust jackets, but they're only $45 because they did fairly large quantities. And these are short story collections culled from previous editions. So they're first editions in this format, and they're $45 each. Very quickly, I'll show you a couple of the non-mysteries. This is a very rare book in the original paper wrappers. It's a World War I, and they're funny. Getting up to World War I. Anyway, soldiers who were preparing for World War I, 1914, and it lasted in the original wrappers all this time. Very rare book. In the wrappers, usually falls apart or is rebound, or just has vanished from the face of the earth. That's $75. Black Avon's historical novel. And it's a first, and it's only $25, 1925. And it's, even though it's a very scarce book, it's very inexpensive because I don't really carry non-mysteries in the store. So I priced it low. Here's his early book of poetry called Writ in Barracks, and laid in is this rare pamphlet. And this is from 1900. This is when he was trying to earn a living as a journalist and a poet. So 1900, there's no information on the copyright page, but there was only one edition of this book in 1900, and it's $45. And I'm just showing, this is a reprint. I'm just showing it because it's got a nice dust jacket. It's an A.L. Burt reprint, and you don't see early jackets all that often. And that's just $25. That is as much as I can fit into the Edgar Wallace. Was not very edifying, I realize that. I'll do better next week. Thanks for watching.